Dude, I just gotta tell you something that I find very amusing. I use Descript to record this, and
Yeah.
when I start recording, instead of counting down 3, 2, 1, it counts down 2, 1, 0. And I'm sure that's just an off by one error, but it just amuses me every time.
Oh
Um,
man. See, that could have disastrous results though. Like this is why the meaning of numbers is so important. Because like
yeah.
imagine a spaceship liftoff. Like what if the guy engaged the engines at 1, but he was supposed to wait till 0?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics.
This is our 7th episode on Gödel, Escher, Bach by Douglas Hofstadter.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
Hey Matt. I'm doing very well. This is the second half of chapter 4. We ended chapter 4 first half with an unsatisfying addition to the PQ system.
Dude, are you just going to whip this out right now? You're just going to describe
No.
what's unsatisfying? Oh, okay.
I was just going to remind people that we sort of left off on this, a bit of a cliffhanger. We added to the PQ system, which, if you'll recall,
Just
I guess we've
destroyed
described
it.
Yeah, we destroyed it. I mean, we made it like completely uninteresting.
Yeah.
But he basically starts the second half of chapter 4 by talking about Euclid, who Euclid is just a champ to me. Like, I absolutely love Euclid. And he talks about how Euclid was one of the first people to basically deal in rigor, which
Yeah.
is, Euclid came out with Euclid's Elements, which was essentially like the math textbook for centuries. And in Euclid's Elements, what he does is he starts with these, he calls them postulates, which are basically these statements that are, true. They're sort of like indivisible, they're true. And he uses those statements to build new statements. And the Euclid's Elements is just this slow progression of like, okay, here's some true statements. I am now going to use those to reveal a new true statement. I am now going to use that to reveal new truths. And it's just kind of this amazing...
the systems we've been working with, right? Where we have these axioms, and then, although Hofstadter was throwing a little bit of shade at Euclid, he was being a little bit like they were pretty good. You weren't that good.
Yeah, well, he mentions kind of a fatal flaw, and I don't know. I kind of feel weird calling it that because obviously Euclid's contributions to math is like so incredibly monumental that it's hard to even describe. But Euclid was using words to describe these postulates or to lay these postulates out. He was using words like 2 points make a line. But if you really think about it, like, what is a point? What is a line?
Yeah.
You think of a line as straight, but what if you're traveling along the surface of the earth? Like that line is now a curve. So it's, Euclid probably thought he was giving these postulates, which are only interpretable in one way, or interpretable. I don't know what the word is. But in actuality, a lot of mathematicians interpreted these postulates differently. And we'll see throughout the course of this chapter how that led to a lot of mistakes, a lot of wasted years of effort, but also new forms of math.
Yeah, no, this is a very fascinating subject. This leads to these very unintuitive listeners have probably heard of non-Euclidean geometry. And it's funny because non-Euclidean geometry, so you talked about these 5 postulates.
Yeah.
Non-Euclidean geometry still uses the first 4 postulates. It's just the 5th postulate, which is kind of like the redheaded stepchild, but it feels a little bit like rude because like I kind of feel like all of them are Euclidean geometries, and it just so happens that this last one, like it's more of a knob than a rule. You know what I mean?
Wait, can I just say the fifth postulate? Because, like, if you read the 5 postulates, I don't know. I just found it slightly funny because the postulates are these very clear, sort of crystalline statements. Like, here's an example of one of the first 4 postulates. To describe a circle with any center and distance. It's like, that is a very simple statement. You can describe a circle as a center and radius, basically. Or at least I think that's what that means.
Yeah.
But in any case, it's a very simple, cut and dry statement. The 5th postulate is, if 2 lines are drawn which intersect a third in such a way that the sum of the inner angles on one side is less than 2 right angles, then the 2 lines inevitably must intersect each other on that side if extended far enough.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, dude. All your other postulates are like 6 words. And this postulate is so incredibly verbose. And it's also like, I mean, I had to read it like 5 or 6 times in order to even understand what it's saying.
It's funny because I think when you read it, you're like, what is going on? But if you sit down with a paper and a pencil, it actually is pretty, like, as you can draw along with it, it immediately makes sense, I think.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those things where visually it's so clear. It's almost like visually it's very similar to the first 4 postulates because it just has this like immediate meaning if you see it drawn out.
Yeah, there's just a construction. And I think that's what it suffers from is like, you just need to build up this little scene.
Yeah.
So he almost just should have drawn it. You know what I mean? Like, instead of doing it with words, use a visual isomorphism.
He probably should have, because that's probably how he came up with it in the first place.
Yeah.
But in any case, you mentioned that the 5th postulate was this sort of odd man out. And part of the reason for that is because in Euclid's Elements, he doesn't even use the 5th postulate for like the first, I don't know how many, but the book is like a list of whatever, a bunch of postulates. And
propositions, yeah.
Yeah, propositions. And for the first many, many propositions, he does not even use the 5th postulate. So a lot of mathematicians... 28. Okay, I'm so glad you had that number handy. So a lot of mathematicians were like, do we even need this 5th postulate? And that sort of entered us into this age of math where people were basically trying to prove, the 29th proposition, like without using the 5th postulate. This guy, Sacchieri, he did this very interesting thing where he assumed the 5th postulate was false.
Mm-hmm.
And then he tried to basically go through Euclid's Elements and like see how far he could get by assuming the 5th postulate was actually false. And this was a really fascinating thing. Basically, this guy did this, he published it, and then he died. But what this work showed was that these new forms of geometry existed. Like you just mentioned, non-Euclidean geometry.
Well, it's funny, though, because his assumption was that he arrived at a contradiction.
Yeah.
So, but this goes back to what you were saying before about the imprecision of language, because he has this hilarious phrase, which is, he reached a proposition which was, quote unquote, repugnant to the nature of the straight line.
Yeah.
And so, and this is the thing, it's like, because he used the term straight line in these postulates. I mean, it's all over the place. Every single one talks about straight lines, aside from all right angles are congruent in the first 4.
Yeah.
But when you break that 5th postulate, lines are they no longer operate like you're talking about, the shortest path across the earth is curved. So you wouldn't say it's a straight line in the common sense understanding of the term.
Right. Which is basically elliptical geometry, right? Where it's like points and lines lie on a sphere. And you can have a, sort of quote unquote straight line, but that line lies on the sphere. So in actuality, like if you think of a 3-dimensional space, it is a curved line. But these are valuable forms of geometry. Like they're very useful for sort of exploring other areas of math, but they're just
Right.
not compatible with Euclidean math, which is why they're called non-Euclidean geometry.
Right. Right. And I did want to talk about this. So there's another formulation of that fifth rule called the parallel postulate. So my understanding is these are isomorphic with one another. So it says, given any straight line and a point not on it, there exists one and only one straight line which passes through that point and never intersects the first line, no matter how far they are extended.
Right.
So this is kind of the opposite point, where it's like he's saying, well, if these two lines are slightly angled towards each other, eventually they will intersect. This is kind of making the opposite claim, which is like, if you have a point not on a line, there does exist one line which is parallel to it.
Right. This is the postulate that mathematicians were sort of breaking in order to come up with like hyperbolic geometry, right?
Right. Exactly. And so, like, the knob here is how many lines? Like, Euclid's fifth says there's exactly one. But if there are no lines that are parallel, then you have elliptical geometry, like you're saying. And if you have more than one, at least two of those parallel lines, then you have hyperbolic geometry.
Right. Yeah. Which is kind of a brain-breaking idea.
Yeah, I still don't feel like I have an intuitive sense. I have seen mind-bending visualizations of hyperbolic geometry. Like, you have a video game that takes place in hyperbolic geometry. It's very hard to reason about.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, elliptical geometry to me makes sense. I think because there's such an obvious like parallel to the Earth itself.
Right. I did want to call out one point about elliptical geometry, which was like, when I was reading this, I was a little bit confused because if you think about the Earth, latitude and longitude, all of the latitude lines are parallel to one another. And I was like, wait a minute, like, you can have parallel lines with one another. So I did want to call that out as something that confused me. I was like, parallel lines exist. But in this system, a line is always what is referred to as a great circle. So it always is the largest, possible circumference.
Like the equator.
Like the equator, or like one of the, one of the meridians, like the prime meridian.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is like slightly unintuitive. If you consider 2 points on a circle, you can actually come up with a bunch of different arcs that pass through both of those points. I think you have infinitely many.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can have a circle of various diameters, but then there's only one great circle that passes through both of those points.
Ah, right. So in order for the first postulate to be true, everything has to be great circles.
You have to define a line as being a great circle.
Right, because the first postulate is to draw a straight line from any point to any point.
I wonder if there's more there, because you wind up with more conceptions of lines. Because obviously you have a ring around this circle, but like, what is that?
Yeah.
So, anyway, I'll stop there. But this was one thing I just wanted to raise that as like a point of confusion for myself, because it seemed wrong based on if you just considered latitude circles as an example.
Right. But yeah, so he goes on to get into this concept of consistency and inconsistency, which he sort of starts describing these different forms of consistency, which I found pretty interesting. He talks about internal consistency, which is, a system is internally consistent if none of its theorems are incompatible with each other, or if, in other words, if all of its theorems are compatible with one another. Basically doesn't contain any contradictions. He talks about logical consistency, which is another way of saying there's no contradictions. Then there's like mathematical consistency, which is basically just that it obeys math. He gets into this concept of like other worlds or other universes or hypothetical worlds where, you know, maybe you can have a hypothetical world where, what was the example he used? It was something like green is not green. Just these like hypothetical worlds where, you know, basically inconsistencies exist. Yeah, I wish I had written down the example because he gets into this sort of philosophical debate of like, is math the same in every conceivable hypothetical world? You know, it's like, can you have a world where 1 + 1 is 3? And I think the conclusion he comes to, I don't know if he comes to like a very hard and fast conclusion, but at least to me, it seemed like even in these hypothetical worlds, you need to have some form of logic. Like there needs to be some way of building a chain of logical thought, like creating a true statement and then building another statement on top of that. So kind of like what Euclid was doing. And I thought that was super interesting. It's like, you know, you can't create these hypothetical worlds where they're just completely contradictory and you can't possibly even, you know, create any logical chain of reasoning.
So it sounds like there's some basic layer that they all share, but it's very minimal. Like the only thing you can say is that you would have some set of axioms at the bottom and things would have to be built up from there. But then aside from, as to the specifics of those axioms, like nothing can be said.
And in this course of describing hypothetical worlds, he throws out Escher's relativity, which is a really cool drawing.
Classic.
Yeah, so I almost want to like describe it. So relativity is basically that one where there's all these staircases kind of heading in various directions. And the world is like topsy-turvy, like it's collapsing in on itself. Like one staircase heads down and one heads up, but they both go to the same place. So it's like you're heading down and up at the same time. So it's one of those drawings where the more you look at it, the more you realize that it's like this impossible world and that the stairs can't possibly be real.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because he talks about these different ways of interpreting that drawing. And one way of interpreting the drawing is just like to not even interpret it as stairs, like to just interpret it as like random lines in a jumble. And how like that's the only way to interpret it that's actually like true.
Right. And I mean, this gets at what we were talking about before, where it's like there's consistency at the visual level.
Mm-hmm.
But this violates every conception of like physical consistency. Like in this picture, you have two people walking on the same set of stairs, but one person is using what seem to be the top of the stairs and, you know, as the top. And then the other person is using the front of the stairs as the top, you know, as compared to the other person.
It's very, there is no spoon from the Matrix.
Oh, yeah.
It's this like, you know, if you think of reality as just a bunch of random lines or like a bunch of, you know, pixels or something in an image, then it loses all meaning. And, you know, stairs are not stairs.
I think you could come up with a consistency in this universe where the laws of physics are a function of your past experience. Because I feel like you could come up with a video game that has physics like this. And you have some internal state as like a character that the universe knows about. And I'm not saying like a real actual physical universe could ever do this, but I think you could come up with a description of a world that could behave this way.
Oh, like where if you're walking up the side of a staircase, like that is now the ground. basically.
Exactly. So like you have a certain state and you reach a particular part, and it's always consistent relative to like your whatever like your current value of up is.
Yeah.
But you
Ooh.
could have these transition points where you like, or maybe for some of these people, like their personal down is always in one direction, but then like different people have different ups and downs.
Dude, crazy. Can you imagine like
Anyway,
a Quake deathmatch in like a Escher painting?
dude, wait, I feel like you could do that. Like every player is down is a different direction.
Dude, that'd be insane.
And then you do have to have these very crazy levels that look like Escherian staircases.
Yeah,
Um,
the railgun sniping would be very difficult because it'd be hard to know like what people's trajectories are.
Yeah, do your bullet? I guess your bullets arc this. Like maybe you wouldn't simulate gravity in on your bullets.
This section made me think of teriology. Are you familiar?
Oh, what is teriology?
This is such a dumb thing to bring up, but do you remember that actor? Do you remember the movie? Was it called Hustle and Flow, or was that just the name of the song in the movie? Uh,
I'm not familiar. Like that phrase sounds familiar, but I don't have it attached to anything.
okay. Anyway, there's this actor named I think his name's Terrence Howard. And he was kind of a famous actor, like maybe a decade ago. He was in one of the Iron Man films. He kind of had this, very upward slope to his career trajectory. But then I mean, I shouldn't be laughing because I think he just had like a mental break or something. He came out with this new form of math called
Hmm.
teriology, where 1 + 1 was not 2. I think it might have been 1. It was like one
Oh.
plus one is 1. Um, and I guess he's gone on to like continue working on teriology. Like he's basically stopped acting and now he's working on like, he's trying to sell some kind of like new form of particle physics to like some African government.
Oh, okay. I mean,
And
what cool things can you do in teriology?
I mean, I wish I knew. There was like an article about it at one point and it was moderately interesting. I feel like there was something to do with the square root of 2 that he, some quote unquote breakthrough he had with the square root of 2. But
It's funny because this was something I was thinking about as we were reading about Euclid. Is you had some guy assembling this compendium 2,000 years ago, and people are still debating the things that he said. Like, just imagine the genius that you have to be, because
yeah,
he set up this set of rules so precisely that for literally 2,000 years, like no people couldn't like decide whether or not something was true about it.
yeah, no, I mean it's a testament. He literally invented like this whole new branch of, and this is like a top level branch of math. Like if you think about the taxonomy of math, this is a kingdom of
Yeah,
math. And yeah, he kind of put it down in whole cloth in Euclid's Elements. Like it's completely insane the level of achievement.
all of that is to say that maybe teriology is onto something.
That's what I wonder from time to time. It's like because you reach a point where you realize math is just so incredibly abstract, and you can have Euclidean geometry, but then all of a sudden some mathematician is like, oh wait a second, here's non-Euclidean geometry, and then you find out that actually has this very valuable insight, and you can like learn new things based on it.
Yeah,
And you realize that numbers are just these tools, and maybe thinking of numbers completely differently like gives you a new tool to like explore a new area. There was a really, really awesome Veritasium video on p-adic numbers.
yeah. I'm so glad you're bringing this up.
Yeah, like I totally love that video. I would recommend it to anyone, but he basically describes this new way of thinking about numbers that like basically unlocked a new knowledge. And I just think that's so interesting. It's like you're kind of moving around these abstract ideas and like, boom, all of a sudden I got a CD player. It's like it's in this, area of just complete and utter abstraction. But then all of a sudden it touches on like a piece of reality that you can then use for a practical purpose.
No, that video more than I think any other YouTube video has really like, it just made me realize how, yeah, like you say, numbers are just symbols.
Yeah.
And you can set up symbols with like completely different rules.
Right. Yeah. No, it's cool.
Did you have anything else? There was this stuff about sufficient complexity, sufficient power for a system for Gödel's theory of incompleteness.
Yeah, my last note was on completeness, and it actually wraps back around to why I found the new conception of the PQ system so unsatisfying.
Nice.
And that is that you realize quickly that in the PQ system, there are many expressible truths which aren't theorems in the system, which, at least for me, it just has this immediately unsatisfying feeling. And I think that that's what is it, Russell and Whitehead?
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I need to define completeness. So completeness is when all statements which are true and which can be expressed as well-formed strings of the system are theorems, meaning that the rules of the system can produce all statements which are true, which is kind of an insane idea. I mean, it sounds like a relatively simple thing, and this is what Russell and Whitehead were so caught up on, is, mathematicians kept devising these systems, but the systems had all these big gaps. It's like, okay, we can use geometry to talk about, solving these problems, but if you're talking about working in this hyperbolic space, geometry doesn't work. So it's like, okay, now we need a whole new system to even talk about those things. And this is what I didn't like about the PQ system, sort of the definition of the PQ system, is that it just has so much truth that is not even representable in the system, that it was like unsatisfying.
Yeah. And I mean, but that's actually a feature, because the fact that it's not a very good system means that it's not susceptible to Gödel's wily devices.
Right. It's a low fidelity system.
Record player. Okay. Yeah. I don't think I had anything else. I agree. This PQ system, let's just throw it in the bin.
Yeah, it's trash. We'll move on to other systems. But man, I mean, this chapter, I think you said this in the last episode, but it really opens up. Like, this is starting to get very interesting. The plot is thickening. My brain is hurting from all this new information. And I'm pretty stoked to keep reading this.
I think our journey to become like those mysterious white-haired men who just like burst out with incomprehensible statements is well underway from having read this book.
Yep.
All right. Well, I will see you next time for chapter 5.
See you next time, Matt.